Welcome, Carm Capriato, the Service Aftermarkets podcast pioneer with the gold standard of aftermarket business podcasts. Join me for Aftermarket Insights as we advance the aftermarket. And as always, know that you'll learn just one thing. Find us on your favorite podcast listening app and remarkableresults.biz or on my YouTube channel. Hey everybody, Carm Capriato, Remarkable Results Radio, and I'm with my friend Dr. David Weiman. Hello, Dr. David.
Hello.
Oh boy. Okay, everyone. We're going to talk about some really interesting things about change and thinking all about goals that we want to set for 2024. And some people mean that's the change, what's that ugly, terrible C word, change. What we want to talk about with Dr. David, why does change bother some people but not others? What are some common reactions to change in a service organization if the owner's resistance to change? How does it work? How do we get anything done? How do we improve? And how can someone know that they don't like change but get more comfortable with it? And being a psychologist, Dr. David from Weiman Consulting, WeimanConsulting.com, I figured it would be so cool to have you on as you help your clients saying, oh, you want to do this? Very good. It's unlike you to want to do that. How are you? So thank you so much for wanting to be here. And it may just help us with getting those goals of 2024 done. And we were talking in the green room. I got a little sniffle. You got a little cough. Everybody I know has got something going on. The doctors are busy. So let's jump in. Why does change bother some people and not others?
I was reminded in prep for the show of Mark Twain quip. There's two kinds of people in the world. One kind separates people into two kinds of people, and the other kind doesn't. And I'm definitely the kind that separates people into two kinds of people, the kind of people who enjoy change. And I do think that's part of our own style or personality. There's people who love that, and there's people who don't enjoy it at all. And so it presents some interesting opportunities for conversation around so many areas of what your listeners deal with in a technical field, in a field that has connections to things that are so important to people, and where change just happens all the time because of the pace of technology and how it's increasing. Some interesting observations people have made, for example, of how much changed up to a certain point before computers and then how rapidly change happened after that. And so for the folks in the category of I don't like change very much, particularly in your field where it's so different, when you look under a hood of a car from one generation to another, radically different. We had talked before in a prior podcast about a colleague of mine in the service field who said, well, today he was getting ready to retire, and he said, today you have to be better on a computer than an engine in order to repair cars. But yeah, I do think that some people are just constitutionally enjoy change. They enjoy when something new happens. They enjoy when things are in flux, and other people, and I do think it's part of personality. I don't think it's DNA or how they were raised or anything like that. But I think there's some folks who just generally don't like that very much.
Well, that's so interesting because as I'm hearing you're describing a little bit of me because I believe I'm a change agent. Okay. And I love change. I love discovery. And I love new ideas, new things. How could we do this old way in a new way? And I'm fascinated. It's like that. There's a bubble. It's like I'm always looking for things that would catch my eye. Now, maybe that's a disorder. maybe I'm strange or weird.
Compulsion, maybe.
Yeah. Oh, that's very good. Thank
you. Not a bad thing. The change compulsion is good. And you're bringing up something interesting because without people testing limits, without people trying new things, nothing advances. It just stays static. And again, in your role in particular, you have the opportunity to influence people to see change in a different way.
No kidding. I'm a person that an individual said, Carm, go figure it out and let us know when this thing is really baked. We got a cake, and then come back and tell us about it. And then we're on board. So maybe there's some different degrees of change agents out there, people that are willing.
And yeah. I mean, and even within an organization itself, there's some people who have set processes and they just want folks to implement their process. And there are other folks who are looking for innovation. They want people to come up with new ideas, new ways of doing things. And I do think you can see that culture in every type of organization.
All right, let's jump into some common reactions to change.
The four that come to mind most readily are confusion. just why are we changing? Why do we need to do that? I like the way that things were before. Then you can have resistance, which is confusion plus now I'm actively working against you. So we're going to roll out a new way of, oh, a buddy of mine who works in a sales organization found that when he took over this group of sales reps, they all had physical like calendars where they kept all their appointments. And he wanted to move to a system that was driven by tablets, where they would take tablets out into the field. And the ones who resisted were kept, they would carry the tablet, but they'd still carry around their physical like planner with them. The resistance was real. They were like, screw this, I'm not doing that. So they resisted by actively working against it. The third is resignation, which isn't great, but resignation is just where the person kind of gives up. That's different than confusion and is different than resistance. And the fourth category, you have people who are optimistic when they hear that a change process is coming, and they kind of look forward to, they see the change as something that's positive. But the psychology of change is somewhat complex. And that's why you can have all these different reactions to it, even within one team.
You got me really thinking heavy with all of these. Resignation, I'm out of here. Optimism, ooh, I can't wait, about time.
Yeah.
Confusion, somebody go figure it out. And then resistance is, listen, this is working perfectly. Why do we have to improve? A new piece of software comes out, 2.9, and we have to adapt to it. Every 2.8 was perfect. I can almost see that we live in this world of constant change with the tools that we use, all of our software. Oh, the screen looks different now. Oh my God, what am I going to do?
With the way that emotions are contagious in an organization, folks at either end of that spectrum, the ones who are all in and the ones who will never be in, can sort of drag the folks in the middle in either direction, because there's people who could go either way who are in the middle. So if you have hardcore, I'm not doing it, they're going to pull a few people in their direction, just the same way that people who are super optimistic about it can pull folks that direction also.
So that reminds me that the leader of the organization needs to be the prime change agent somehow. And if they're a visionary, they kind of are, because they do see that there's a future that we have to adapt to and change to. You take that person who's on the negative side of change, the role. What's my role? Do I have to sit down and listen to them and let them talk themselves into going back to the middle?
It depends on how disruptive that person is being. It's super interesting, but the youngest professor in the Harvard Business School, John Cotter, and he had studied why change processes fail in organizations. And then he proposed this stepwise process to solving that. I think there were 8 steps. He basically made his name in the business world by coming up with this system to implement a change. And he wrote about it in a book called Leading Change. Number 1 was establishing a sense of urgency. Number 2 in the steps, I think there were 8 again, was create a guiding coalition. In other words, you want people down through the organization all participating in working like an action team on the change process. You do, to some extent, to address your point, you want to invite the critics to say what they feel could go wrong, because you want to get that information out. You want to get that data out. But you don't want them to do that in a way that actually destroys the organization or stops the process. So getting them involved early matters. And when I've recommended to organizations that they establish what Cotter talked about, like what's the urgency here? Why are we doing it? What's the reason for it? And then we get to the guiding coalition part to make sure that we ask for volunteers to participate, because you don't want to just handpick people who are going to help with the change process. And if a critic says, oh, I want to be on the team helping with the change, we show that we can handle that as a leader by including them and listening and addressing the things that they mention that are negative. If they're just there to torpedo this, then you have to make a different decision, unfortunately, about whether or not that's really the right person for your team. So, and we've talked before in prior podcasts about sort of the makeup of a team and how do we make sure that we have the right folks on board. Sometimes a change process can be diagnostic if you find that somebody's actively working against you. We don't, because that might come out in other ways and in other places too.
All over our website, remarkableresults.biz, is a search button, a search bar. Type in Dr. David, type in Weiman, and listen to all of Dr. David's shows. We've always had so much fun. Thank you for your support in coming on. Now,
Sure.
back to change, David. People tend to project their worst fears. Oh my God, this is going to happen.
Right. I've never been in a doctor's office where they said, "Oh, I'm going to look at the results of your EKG. I'll be back in 10 minutes," where I didn't think that it was just going to be horrible, and that I was going to be immediately taken into surgery for something. By the way, that never happened. And a wiser person than I once told me, most of the things that we fear the most don't happen. But when we start to tense up, we start to get overstressed, we start to think about what we're afraid of, we kind of get this little tunnel vision going on, and it can be difficult to break out of that. I imagine that some of that, Carm, and you would relate to this as well, is just self-protective. Like if we prepare for the worst, then when the news comes back that's not as bad, then we're okay with that in a way. But I do feel like you're right. Like we project into a void what our worst fears are. I don't know why we do that. And everyone I was raised that way. I mean, people were constantly worried about what the worst thing that could happen was, but that puts you on a kind of alert that the stats just don't support. Like that person that I mentioned, who was a mentor of mine, said, most of the things we fear the most don't happen, but we have a hard time remembering that when we're in that mode that you described.
Hey, it's no secret. We're facing a technician shortage, and Napa Auto Care has a solution with the Napa Auto Care Apprentice Program. The program was pioneered by one of our own. Pete McNeil and Master Technician Jeg Sorensen from McNeil's Auto Care in Sandy, Utah, realized that the problem of not having technicians available for hire was not going to solve itself and decided to take action and look at a different audience of individuals available for hire. A focus was put on younger individuals with the right passion, desire, and attitude to work in the automotive repair industry. Jake and Pete sought after these individuals and developed a technician apprentice program to give them the training needed to become a successful technician in today's world. The Napa Auto Care Apprentice Program includes a comprehensive 9-stage curriculum that includes a variety of types of training, and they are classroom training videos exclusive to the apprentice program. Now, these videos provide in-depth training from a successful master technician. Also, Autotech classes with instructor-led courses offered through Napa Autotech and Autotech e-learning. This web-based e-learning is designed to target specific training topics. And finally, hands-on learning. The apprentice will apply the skills gained from the classroom training videos, Autotech instructor-led training, and Autotech e-learnings in the shop with the guidance of a mentor. The apprentice program curriculum is competency-based, meaning an apprentice can move through each stage at a pace that best suits them. Most apprentices complete the program within 2 years. Upon completion, apprentices will have earned ASE G1, A4, A5, and AC certifications, adding industry validation to the skills an apprentice acquires. Look, having an apprentice in your shop will ultimately benefit your bottom line as they advance through the program. And in most cases, as the apprentice develops their skill set producing billable hours, you'll begin to see a growth in your gross profit by stage 5. One of the largest barriers to entry for individuals looking to enter the automotive repair industry is the cost of tools. Now, keep your apprentice motivated with an apprentice toolkit. Now, Napa Auto Care has worked with our supplying partners to offer an exclusive comprehensive tool set, including a 4-drawer tool cart for all registered apprentices. Hey, to learn more, members can visit member.napaautocare.com. Thanks for bringing up this whole healthcare thing. I always draw parallels to it. I was on a call just yesterday. We're recording this in the early part of January, which I think is so critical to get change discussed. 59 years old, and says I haven't been to the doctor in 7 years. Now, I am not a medical doctor. I am not. But I looked at that person and I said, I think by then I was going yearly. So I don't know what the number is, if there's a number, if there's a start, if there's an end, there's a beginning. But I know in this gap of change or this fear thing, Dr. David, when I go for the blood work and I go in there on my annual, I'm driving into the doctor's office saying, God, I hope I've done good. So there's that gap of unknown, and you're waiting for that. And if not, what happens next? Not only happens, I think, in your own personal well-being, and it goes back to, we all know the severity of heart disease. It's serious, but it doesn't make many do anything about it.
No,
To
you're
me,
absolutely right. And this mindset that you're talking about is key. I do think there's like, in thinking about optimists versus pessimists, I think that's sort of an interesting overlay to change, because I think optimists feel like them doing something in any situation would potentially make the situation better. And so going for a physical exam gives us the opportunity to get that data and then do something about it. There is a very interesting interview. I just saw a brief clip of it where Warren Buffett asks a group of people. I don't want to misphrase or mischaracterize what he said, but my recollection of what he said is, if you could only have one car for the rest of your life, how would you take care of that car? And he said, well, that's kind of like your body. You only get this one car to drive around in. It's your body. And so how would you take care of that? To your point, there was a study of people who believed that stress would cause physical illness. Those people got sick to a much greater degree than people who didn't believe that. Our beliefs about these things are really powerful, and our beliefs about change really matter. And that's why, just to loop back to what you were saying earlier, when you have somebody who believes that change is negative and they're scared of it and they're going to resist, and they're going to show you why you're wrong, that's a really destructive, corrosive person to have in your organization.
Let's talk about the opposite of that. I am a leader of my company. I've got people in my organization that are innovative. Add the word change in there somehow, because innovation in my mind means change. How do we help in this great service organization of ours where technology is coming at us at the speed of life? How do we embrace that? So if you're negative with change, but you've got people that are innovators, you got to open yourself up.
You do. If not, they'll go somewhere else where they're, because if you think about, and I think we've talked about this before, but the essence of someone in a service field is they're problem solvers, right? But there's the textbook way of solving the problem, and then there's the non-textbook way. That's where the innovation comes in. Long time ago, you and I talked about a Jeep that I was having issues with because when the air conditioning was on, the inside floor was getting flooded. And the wonderful mechanic who took it out for a test drive said, "Can I change something on it?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "There's a little pipe that is supposed to send water out the front of the Jeep." This was a Jeep Wrangler from the late 90s. He said, does this only happen on the highway?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "What I think is happening is the wind is blowing that condensed water back up into the cabin of the car, or the onto the floor. I might just turn it so that it's not facing front anymore." So that's innovation. I don't think there was the manual that said, "Oh, if you have this problem, turn this part around." He innovated, he figured that out, and he was checking with me to see if I was okay with that. We went off the textbook, we went off the script. We want people like that. We want people as problem solvers to come up with new ideas. And so if you have a leader of a service team, particularly the owner, who's squelching that, it's not that the ideas aren't there. The person just isn't able to use them. They're not able to put them into practice. And we will probably lose them along with the ideas, because they'll go somewhere else where they're able to put that into practice. And by the way, if folks want to pause and rewind, you'll notice how Carm's voice was going up when he was talking about innovation and change, because he's naturally excited about that. So when you're listening to your own employees talk, if you see the spark, don't stamp that out. Don't squelch that. Learn more about what they think and what they want to do with that, and come up with ways that you can let them activate that, let them try it, let them and see what happens.
I didn't know my voice went up. I
Yes,
had
it did.
no idea.
You sounded very excited, and that's awesome.
I can't help but think in the last few minutes the word creativity is there. Innovation, creativity, they probably mean the same thing. So you've got to be able to relate. So how does an individual at the top of an organization get comfortable with change? I mean, God, that's the $50,000 question.
For people who are uncomfortable with it and want to get comfortable with it, look for the pieces that aren't changing in the innovation. Focusing on what's staying the same can be super helpful. Let's say somebody says, "I think we ought to use tablets in our shop, and here's how I think we ought to use them." Instead of just listening to what somebody's saying when they come in, we should start taking notes, or whatever it is. Maybe it's not a tablet, maybe it's a physical a booklet or something. What's similar is the customer's still telling us something and we're still taking down the information. There's an owner who's a little nervous about implementing the change. look for what is staying the same. What's staying the same is we're getting information and we're trying to translate it somehow into confirming what the problem is and then taking action on it. That is always helpful. In my own experience in consulting with a lot of organizations of different sizes and a lot of teams of different sizes, when I've said to someone, what isn't changing? You can almost see they relax a little bit. They go, oh, well, what's not changing is we're still going to do X, Y, and Z. It's not typical that an organization entirely changes over, right? It's more typical that there's things that are high leverage changes that are done, but they're typically not wholesale. Everything in the organization is changing. And so it's a little easier to find what's staying the same. And that's what I try to focus someone's attention on if I know they're particularly anxious about a change process.
Well, it's fascinating to hear you, and I think for our listener, there's some motivation happening here. But let's go back to you talked about common reactions, confusion, resistance, resignation. I'd love you to go a little deeper into those. Like, for example, confusion. How am I going to fix that?
What Cotter felt, John Cotter, who I mentioned earlier, was that confusion was the result of us not communicating enough about the change to people. So his solution to confusion is you want to communicate much more than you as the owner think you have to get the message across to people. Confusion is a lack of data, right? It's they don't know why we're doing this and when did you make this decision and why didn't you tell me before and why am I the last person to know? It's better to error towards over communicating than under communicating, and that helps resolve the confusion. You keep people in the loop, and that's where the guiding coalition, having a sort of a team of folks helping with the change process, you encourage each of them to talk with everyone else about what's changing who's not on that change team, because that keeps people in the loop.
I wrote down as you were saying why, who, what, when, how.
Yep.
And it almost like the word resistance. How are you going to get people to come on? I love the communication piece, but also to describe this is what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it, who's involved. And if that was part of that commitment to get change to be embraced, that's the formula for this episode. I think we basically laid it out.
Yeah, without question.
Ooh, resistance. Now, how about resignation? I'm out of here. I mean, how can I solve a person who's got that attitude of no?
So a lot of times the resigned person isn't raising their hand and saying they're resigned. It's through their action. They're just not on board. You watch their body language, they're not engaged. And so engaging them, what a lot of teams do is the leader says, I want to know what everybody thinks about this change. 3 out of 5 people raise their hands. Well, what are the 2 who didn't raise their hands thinking? Well, a lot of times the leader figures they don't have anything to say, so I'm going to pass them on by. But maybe we're missing resignation there. And so instead, I would say, I want to know what everybody thinks about this change, and I want to hear from each person. Carm, let's start with you. And then go around the table, go around the shop, and hear from everybody. If there's somebody who doesn't talk, then I want to connect with them privately and say, how do you feel about it? What do you think the pros and the cons are? So I want to overcome the resignation with engagement by proactively connecting with them and asking them how they feel about it. Not everybody likes to talk in a group. If you have the folks in the shop all sitting there together after hours, or you had them come in 15 minutes early and there's somebody who's not talking, it's not that they have nothing to say. They're just not comfortable saying it in that setting.
Yeah.
So we want to connect with them individually, because a lot of times we can turn giving the resigned person a task, a piece of something to do, small piece, can help overcome that, because now they have a reason to be involved with us, and that can turn that resignation around.
I think you just nailed something so important. I'm leading my company. We have a 2.8 piece of software coming out in our shop management system. It's going to do this and this. We've been waiting for this. We're going to fix and change this. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. Who wants to learn this? Who wants to fix this? Who wants to be in charge of that? I love engaging, if you
Right.
will, the team.
And if they ask and someone doesn't volunteer, I can say to that person, John, I know that you're awesome with X piece of this other software. I'd love your help with this, because I think you understand totally how this, like when we finalize whatever it is, or when we've done a measurement of something, you're just really good at that. I'd love your help with that.
I imagine certain egos get in the way of people not wanting to volunteer or my persona in the business is I'm the smart but quiet person, and I believe in this thing, but I'm not going to show it to anyone. To your point, if someone isn't vocal in a meeting, we need to commit to ourselves to do a one-on-one and see where that person stands and what they're willing
Yeah.
to do to make it work. Wow.
And that doesn't have to be a huge investment in time, but simply having that one-on-one makes a difference because they're going to share data that they weren't sharing when there were other people around.
So bring your observations and your intuition to anything that you know is going to be a big step or change in your company. Okay, Kaizen. I can't help but think about these small, great, mini incremental positive things that we can do.
Well, one of the things that causes change processes to fail is they're all in. They want to change everything at one time. That can blow up pretty spectacularly. So, with one organization that I worked with, all the big wigs, the higher ups, the folks in the front office, figured out a change to a process. They rolled it out. They didn't ask anyone their opinion. They didn't talk to anyone in advance. They didn't want to hear the resistance. They didn't want to see the resignation. It just really backfired. People refused to do it. So they wound up having to spend 3 times as much time on the back end redoing it than they did if they had just gone like step by step. The Kaizen method or Kaizen, implementing change in small incremental steps. That is also part of Kotter's model where you celebrate small wins. You don't want to implement 6 things at one time because if you're even in mechanical terms, making individual changes lets you see the result of that before you make the next change. If you try to do too many things at once, it's very difficult to figure out the root cause when something goes wrong. And they regularly go wrong in change processes. Despite Kotter's model, sometimes you have to move back a step, but the small change piece is really important. And just a real simple example, a friend of mine wanted to start getting up an hour earlier every day so that she could work out in the morning. And that was it wasn't a New Year's resolution, by the way. You mentioned that we're in the beginning of January. It was just a change that she thought would be helpful. So she told me she set her alarm for an hour earlier right away. And she said it was just super hard to get up. Like sometimes I keep hitting the snooze button on my phone or alarm clock. And she wound up not getting up an hour earlier. So in thinking about Kaizen, I suggested that she get up, set the alarm 5 minutes earlier, and try that for a few days. Once she got comfortable with it, set it for 5 minutes more earlier. So now she's at 10 minutes. And by making these incremental changes, which are almost unnoticeable, she was able to get to waking up an hour earlier. It seemed easy because of these incremental changes. And there is something in psychology called the just noticeable difference. And it's the degree to which something has to change for you to notice that it changed. For example, if you were listening to the stereo in your car and we turn the volume up a little bit, you might not notice it right away. It would have to go up, and I think it's a constant of about 10%, if I remember Psychology 101 correctly, that something has to change for you to notice it. If you're working out and you're using 10-pound dumbbells, increasing it by half a pound is not something you would likely notice. It may have to be more than a pound, more than 10%, for you to notice that it's changing. And so in a service environment, picking small things to implement gives you a chance to see how they're going over, see how the team is adapting to it, and then you put the next step of the change in and see how that goes,
I
rather
have
than
to
doing everything at once.
I need to clarify this. Just noticeable differences.
Difference.
I love what that means, and it was that 10% rule. So if I was free weighting and I went from 20 to 30, that's too much? Are you
Yes. Well, you would
suggesting
notice it. You would notice it
I
more.
would notice it, and is that good or bad that I noticed it?
It depends on what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying over a longer period of time to have incremental change, you would change it by a smaller amount. There's a personal finance guru, Coward, who does a radio show and I guess it's a podcast at this point. He did this with running. He just started running a little bit more every day until he got to the distance that he was ultimately trying to achieve. At least this is the way that he explained it. It's not that you wouldn't increase by more than 10%. It's that over a long period of time, if you wanted to gradually change and build up, that's how you would do it.
The companies that listen to my show that we influence in the industry are listening to this, and you know that this is going to be a big year for you. Maybe you're going to buy a place, maybe you're going to remodel, maybe you're going to buy some new equipment, maybe you're going to expand and add a technician. All of these things that are going to happen to you, you need to start thinking, how are you going to make it all work? You can physically do this thing, but then you've got to bring your people along with you. And I think this is a great episode to listen to, be it if you're a pro change, you're a change agent, or you're deathly against it. Your company will never grow, blossom, survive if you're not inside of, and I hate to use the word change again, but the forward progress, maybe momentum, develop momentum.
This is really important too, what you're saying, because the customer doesn't want to get freaked out when they come in and everything has changed. For the customer piece of it also, it's easy to explain to them, if we started doing something where we're going to send them email alerts or email follow-up after we check their car, or a text message, and they're not used to that. What's the same is, hey, it's the same mechanic that you've worked with, Bill, you've worked with many times before. We've just implemented one thing where now we send a text message when your car is ready, or now we send a text message that includes what we diagnosed, or whatever it is. We have to be aware of how the customer is going to see it too. And when we have customers that are bought in, what did they buy into? They bought into our values, they bought into our mission, they bought into our purpose, how we treat them. And so that's unlikely to radically change. But if we're implementing something that affects the customer too, then being aware of that and the potential impact on them and reminding them of what's staying the same. That's why I said, hey, Bill's still servicing your car. We're just using this method to stay in touch with customers along the way of the service process. That's something that would be easy to implement.
I loved this. Thank you. I think it's a perfect time of the year to discuss change. I got to tell you, I learned a bunch of things, and I'm sure our listener did too. Dr. David Weiman Consulting, psychologist at WeimanConsulting.com. Now, if you learned something and you feel that, ooh, Dr. David got to you, go do something with it. Thanks, Dr. Dave.
Thank you for having me, Carm.